So the Las Vegas Raiders have officially put in a claim for a linebacker, Brennan Jackson, coming over from the Los Angeles Rams. And we're going to talk about this today. Very, very excited about this one. Brennan Jackson's coming over to the Raiders. He's literally in his second season. The guy was a 5th-round pick last year for the Rams. The Rams do have a really stacked defensive line, which I think makes sense why they weren't able to keep this guy on the actual 53-man roster. I have no doubt in my mind, if Brennan Jackson cleared waivers, the Rams would have officially signed him right back. The fact that this guy has the potential and upside that he's kind of flashed on tape, I'm not surprised that the Raiders brought this guy in. He had 3 sacks over the course of preseason. The guy made multiple run plays, but more than that, when you watch his tape, the guy wins at the point of attack. And you see that long frame by Brennan Jackson. You see a guy that has huge upside, huge potential, and we'll see what he can actually do for the Raiders. He'll have to come in, he'll have to learn that Pete Carroll scheme and system, and he'll have to kind of develop in that scheme specifically. But the size profile that this guy has kind of fits what the Raiders want. Now, he is 6'4", he is 270 pounds. To me, he's an outside linebacker that, may drop back into coverage, but he's also a guy that's going to rush the passer. The Raiders have tried Jermaine Pratt on the line of scrimmage multiple times. I don't know if I would agree that Pratt's best ability is on the line of scrimmage. I think Pratt is more so of a guy you want as a stack linebacker. I'm not saying that Pratt can't necessarily line up on the line of scrimmage, but what I think with Pratt is that he's not super long, he's not super lengthy, and I do think that makes a difference in terms of being able to take on offensive tackles, being able to set that front side edge. I think with a guy like Brennan Jackson, his best ability is as an outside linebacker that's going to rush the passer, that can defend the run. And the guy has moves as well. So when I watched his tape, I noticed this guy utilized the spin move a couple different times. On other plays, he was like swiping and using his hands. He's just swimming over guys. The guy has pass rush potential. He has moves within the toolbox. And I always say this, if you have a real pass rush plan, you can, you pretty much flash that right away, right? At any point, if you're in, let's say, a real game and you're going up against an offensive tackle or tight end, literally, how do you shed that guy in front of you? Brennan Jackson flashed a little bit, the way he's able to shed guys. And he had 3 sacks in the preseason. He had a bunch of tackles, tackle for losses. He had pressures. He was constantly pushing guys back and collapsing the pocket. Now, some people are going to say, should the Raiders have went out there and potentially gotten an offensive tackle? We know Thayer Munford has made the Raiders 53-man roster. At least early on, he's on the Raiders 53-man roster. The thing with Thayer Munford is he got his ass kicked so many times over the preseason game. In fact, I actually went back and I went into a PFF Ultimate, which is the advanced platform that PFF has, right? It's kind of what the NFL teams use. And I looked at every single offensive tackle specifically, and how many losses a guy had. Thayer Munford led the offensive tackles. That's every offensive tackle. He had, I think, 23 or 24 losses according to Pro Football Focus. No other offensive tackle came close to that. What's crazy about that right there is the fact that you could actually watch the tape, and the tape backs that up. Like, Thayer Munford was bad, and that was against backup players. Imagine when you put a starting edge player in front of Thayer Munford. When George Karlaftis ends up lining in front of Thayer Munford and he pass rushes for Chris Jones, or Joey Bosa, or Nick Bosa, or Myles Garrett. When you put one of these guys in front of Thayer Munford, if a backup's beating his ass, you don't think these superstar players are going to be able to beat up on Thayer Munford as well? I hope DJ Glaze and Colt Miller do not go down this season, because if any of those guys miss time, the Raiders are going to be in trouble, especially if they roll forward with Thayer Munford. Now, just kind of getting back to the offensive tackles that were kind of waived yesterday, I really wanted the Raiders to go out there and bring in Esa Poole. Poole also went to, I believe he was at Washington State. I think that was the school he was at. Surprisingly, Brennan Jackson's also kind of from Washington State, which is kind of ironic. But I really wanted Esa Poole to the Raiders. I think Esa Poole has upside more so than what Thayer Munford has shown. In my opinion, what Esa Poole showed in just his first preseason, there's more potential in his tape than Thayer Munford. Now, we do have to realize Poole did play backup players. And I think it's one of those things where you got to also kind of just factor in, is Esa Poole going to start if Thayer Munford, or does Esa Poole start if one of your offensive tackles goes down? Probably not. But I think this was more so of like long-term development. And I think Esa Poole is going to be a good offensive tackle in the NFL. In fact, the Chiefs wanted this guy back, and there were reports that the Chiefs actually were able to re-sign him back to the practice squad. Later on, it was confirmed that the Jets actually ended up claiming Poole off the waiver wire. And it's important to recognize this. There's not like 500 players that are essentially getting claimed. There's probably like 20 or 25 guys that ended up getting claimed. There are over 1,000 guys cut yesterday. 20, 25 guys that are, ending up getting claimed. To me, that kind of just speaks volumes of the type of tape that Poole has put out there in his very first preseason. And I keep talking about Poole because the Jets technically have had waiver priority after the Raiders, and the Raiders, if they wanted him, could have potentially had him. And the Jets, I also say this, the Jets have taken every single offensive tackle I've wanted for the Raiders over the past 3 seasons. I really wanted Olu Fashanu. Of course, the Jets at that point did pick for the Raiders. They took Olu Fashanu. We took Brock Bowers, which obviously has worked out for the Raiders. Then the following year, which is the most recent draft, I once again wanted Armin Membaugh. And this time the Raiders could have picked Armin Membaugh, but of course, they ended up going with Ashton Jeanty, which I don't hate either. And now I wanted Essa Poole, and the Jets for some reason claim him as well, right? Either way, man, the Raiders are bringing in Brennan Jackson. I want to talk a little bit about his fit with the Raiders. So I've already mentioned that, Jermaine Pratt lined up on the line of scrimmage in preseason, and to me, he didn't look great lining up on the line of scrimmage. Yes, he was okay, and he was able to drop back, and he did a great job when he did drop back into coverage. And I think he's probably a better player to drop back into coverage than Brennan Jackson. I think the difference between Jermaine Pratt and Jackson is that Pratt, as a stacked linebacker, is probably a lot more effective than a guy lined up on the line of scrimmage. As opposed to a guy like Brennan Jackson, if he develops, he can be a guy that could actually start and he could line up on that line of scrimmage. And I'm not saying Brennan Jackson's going to start for the Raiders this season. I doubt it. But long term, week 6 maybe next season at some point, Jackson's the guy that could obviously line up on the line of scrimmage, and he could potentially be that outside linebacker for the Raiders when it comes to base defense. And you shouldn't also overlook the fact that Jackson could actually just develop into a good edge player for the Raiders. The same way Malcolm Koonce has developed, the same way Charles Snowden has developed, the same way, Maxx Crosby is, and I'm not saying Brennan Jackson's going to be those guys specifically, but Robbie Leonard's a great defensive line coach, and I think he gets the best out of edge players. And I think Brennan Jackson has enough in terms of traits that I think for the Raiders this could definitely work out. And I hope it works out because I'm pretty sure when you claim a guy, you're basically taking on their rookie contract or the contract they're already kind of given. With Brennan Jackson specifically, I believe he was drafted in the 5th round, so he would technically have a rookie contract for 4 years. This is year 2, so he's now here for this year and the 2 following years after that. Even if we release him at some point, we'll still have to give him at least a guaranteed portion of his contract. So that's something to just kind of keep in mind. And when I say we have to give him, we're not actually going to pay him out, but we'll take the cap hits. So we always talk about cap hits on this channel, not actual cash going out. Although Mark Davis probably cares a little bit more about that cash as opposed to the cap hits. Either way, Brennan Jackson is coming over to the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, with that being stated, let's go ahead and talk about some of the guys that the Raiders have officially brought back to the practice squad. We have 4 guys that are officially signed. The Raiders have signed 6th-round pick Cam Miller and Tommy Mellott, as well as Shedrick Jackson and Carter Runyan. So all 4 of those guys are being brought to the practice squad. I think this is phenomenal for the Raiders. These are guys that I definitely wanted the Raiders to get. Now, Tommy Mellott, I'm not too high on him, truth be told, but I do like Cam Miller and some of what he's flashed. Shedrick Jackson was the leading receiver for the Raiders in the preseason, and Carter Runyan was the leading receiver among the tight end group, right? Leader in terms of yards, I should say. Carter Runyan, to me, has huge upside, and we'll just start right there with him first and foremost. Runyan, I said this in yesterday's video when he was released, the guy could be a starting caliber tight end at some point. When you look at what the Raiders have, you have Brock Bowers, you have Michael Mayer, you have Ian Thomas. Those are 3 guys that are starting caliber tight ends. All 3 of those guys could go to a team out there and actually start, right? A team that might not have a great tight end right now. To me, Carter Runyan really didn't have a shot to actually make this roster. But the fact that the Raiders are bringing him back, I love the upside with Runyan. I think there's real upside with this guy. Hopefully he's able to continue to kind of develop. Another guy I really liked this preseason was Shedrick Jackson. Did not realize how fast he actually was. The guy ran, I think, a 4.3 340-yard dash. And I know this was hand-timed, but really, really, really fast. And some of that kind of flashed out there. He had a huge week 1 for the Raiders in preseason. as did Cam Miller. Those two guys, although Shedrick Jackson had a good week 2 and week 3 as well, it was definitely not as good as his first game. Same with Cam Miller, phenomenal first game. Kind of struggled in weeks 2 and 3. Either way, love the fact that the Raiders are bringing both of those guys back as well. I think Cam Miller has real upside. And when I say that, what I mean is you look at a guy like Tom Brady who was a 6th-round pick. He wasn't the guy that was supposed to be all-time great. Like he wasn't even really supposed to be a starter for the Patriots. When he did become a starter, people were kind of surprised and they're kind of scratching their head almost, and they didn't necessarily agree with it. But that guy kind of worked his way through and ended up being one of the greatest quarterbacks ever. Tom Brady had huge praise for Cam Miller. But the thing with Tom Brady is it took him some time, right? He struggled a little bit. Cam Miller's going to struggle, and we saw that over the most recent 2 games. He's going to have his struggles, but I always say this, when you look at players, don't look at the struggles. Don't look at like, hey, this guy is struggling, therefore he sucks. Always look at traits. Always look at upside. So when we looked at Malcolm Koonce, for example, in his very first ever preseason, the guy had multiple quarterback hits. He had a couple sacks. The guy dominated, and it was because of the traits that he had. Now, he wasn't great as a run defender. He wasn't consistent in terms of the pass rush technique either. But at some point, it clicked for him. Maxx Crosby had elite hands coming in, and you saw that right away. Literally, as soon as this guy came in, had his first couple games, you saw the elite pass rush upside. And look at Maxx Crosby at this point. Cam Miller could still develop into a good football player down the line. Tommy Millot, I'm not personally as high on him, given that he was a quarterback in college, translated to kind of transitioned to a wide receiver for the Raiders. It was always going to take him some time to kind of develop. But I'm not huge on even, guys like Hunter Renfrow and like those type of slot players. I'm not huge on those guys. Yes, they're good to have in terms of like short yardage situations, but Sean McVay's picking up explosive plays downfield. Kyle Shanahan, 30-yard chunk plays at a time. I don't love slot guys who are going to pick up 2, 3, 4, 5 yards for you. And again, I understand there's a role for these guys, but is Tommy Millot going to develop into a guy that plays 500 snaps a season? We'll see. We'll see if he can develop into that. And do keep in mind, the Raiders are still going to have to fill out the practice squad. So we'll get another group of guys over the next 2 to 3 hours that officially sign with the Raiders. I might talk about it today. I might just do a separate video tomorrow to talk about some of these guys. Let me know if there's some film breakdowns that you guys want to watch. We are 7, 8, 9 days away from the actual regular season starting. So, we have a lot of empty space, let's say, at this point. Let me know what you guys think, man. Let me know if you guys think the Raiders need to go out there and bring in an offensive tackle. They need to go out there and bring in a corner. And then who are some of the practice squad guys that you ultimately want the Raiders to bring back? Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Thumbs up, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time with another video.